Thank you very much for being here, Joe, to give us a presentation today on nursery weed management. Joe Neal is an extension specialist in the horticulture department at North Carolina State University, and he's a weed scientist. So thank you very much, Joe. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Stacy. And today, I want to talk about one component of nursery crop weed management, specifically weed management in container nurseries. And in a nursery weed management plan, we have a lot of components, but one of those components, which I think is underutilized, is the role of sanitation in the overall weed management plan. And today I really want to focus on the sanitation that is in the area around the production areas, not the crop itself, but where are the weeds coming from that then move into our crop production systems. Right. So the obvious one is, of course, we have wind dispersed seeds that are growing around the nursery and on the borders of the nursery, fence rows, and even properties adjacent to the nursery. And these wind dispersed seeds can move very easily into our production areas, causing problems. But the studies that have been done on this suggest that wind dispersal is still a local phenomenon. For example, here's some data on goldenrod seeds. And yes, goldenrod seeds can travel for a long distance on wind currents, but the vast majority of those seeds are falling within 5 to 10 feet of the parent plant. Okay. As you can see from this chart, this is a feet from the weedy border where the goldenrod is, and even though those seed are wind dispersed, the vast majority of the seeds are falling within less than 10 feet from the border, 15 feet, and it decreases as you get further and further from the border. So even though we're not going to get to zero, you're always going to have some wind dispersal that goes a long ways. Managing those plants that are actually on your property and on the fence rows of your property is going to impact the overall population of weeds that get introduced very significantly. So managing your own weed problems is very important. All right. So the wind dispersed seeds, that's an obvious one, but less obvious are the weeds that are growing in the roadways, in the gravel areas, our traditional weeds like the spurge you see in this photograph. Those weeds also spread from our roadways and ground cloth and the gravel areas around our production areas, infesting our crops, right? And how do they do that? Well, the weeds that are common in nurseries often have a mechanism for self-dispersal. So here, for example, is information about bittercress, oxalis. We know those can shoot their seed. The oxalis can shoot its seed up to 12 feet, bittercress 6 feet, but and mulberry weed we know will shoot its seed 4 feet, but phyllanthus down here in the lower right-hand corner will shoot its seed 2 to 3 feet. The prostrate or spotted spurge can shoot its seed 2 to 3 feet, and some of the other species of spurge that are spreading in nurseries now, like hyssop, can shoot their seed even further, up to 6 to 8 feet. So one of the adaptations of our common weeds is a mechanism for self-dispersal. Not only is there self-dispersal, but very rapid germination and growth. And here's a study, we looked at how many days after we seeded. So we seeded on day 0, and we counted the seedling emergence, and after just 5 days, look at that, between 3 and 5 days, we had a dramatic increase in the amount of seed germination. Essentially, this represents about 80% of the potential seed germination occurred in less than a week. And it didn't seem to matter whether it was in the shady area or in full sun, we still got rapid germination in less than a week for our spurge. Once it was germinated, it grew very rapidly. You see in this slide here on on the left is our 2-week-old Spurge seedlings. It doesn't look like much, but just 2 weeks later, this is what the plants can look like. Dramatic growth rates on that. So when it's growing that rapidly, what's next? Flowering and seed production. So we also looked at the flower and seed production, and this is where plants out in full sun, that's the red lines here, the full sun plants are growing and much more rapidly than the ones in shade. And this is for spotted spurge, which is a sun adapted species, right? So it makes perfect sense. It's going to grow faster. It's going to produce more flowers. But I want you to look at the timeline here. And the timeline shows that after about 20 days, we start to see our first flower. By 23 days, we're getting almost 50 flowers per plant. And then within 2 days after that, we're over 300 flowers on every plant. About a week later, we're starting to see seed pod formation. So the seed pod formations are occurring about 26 days after seeding, and then by 28 days or 29 days, so less than 30 days after we put a seed in the pot, we've got over 100 seed pods that have formed on the plant. And we stopped collecting data at that point because the seed pods were falling off and shattering. So we already had seed shed by 31 days after we seeded. So all of these traits together contribute to the ability of a weed like spurge to spread, to create the next generation, and then to continue spreading in the nursery. So it's important for us to control weeds in and around the production areas and the roadways of the nursery before they go to seed, right? So there are lots of sanitation practices. I really want to focus on how we're going to manage those weeds in that roadway there before they have the chance to infest the crop next to it. Okay. So what are our recommended treatments? Our standard treatments for bare ground applications in nurseries and roadway applications in nurseries are SureGuard, Marengo, or Barricade. Those are our 3 most commonly used herbicides. And really today, the SureGuard and the Marengo are the 2 most commonly used ones. They're broad spectrum, they last a good while, they hold up well under irrigation. They're a broader spectrum than the Barricade. Now, we still include Barricade in the in our recommendations here because Barricade is labeled and safe for use around a lot of herbaceous stocks. So if you're growing herbaceous plants, then you may want to use a product that has the potential for safety or greater safety around your herbaceous plants. Not that we're going to spray the Marengo or the SureGuard over your herbaceous crops. That would cause injury. Just spraying the roadways, but using a product that is safe in your crop is a good strategy for making sure that you're not having unintended damage to the crops. All right, so all of these products can also be combined with a post-emergence herbicide as well to get knockdown and residual control. So what's the advantage of these products? Well, we started looking at using these herbicides, flumioxazin and the indaziflam, after we found that railway applications were working very well. So if it could hold up in the gravel of a rail, along a rail line, we felt like it would hold up very well in the gravel around our nursery production areas, and they have. The SureGuard or flumioxazin has pre-emergence and post-emergence activity on broadleaf weeds. It doesn't last as long for grass control, for residual grass control, but it does have good long residual control of broadleaf weeds. The Marengo has broad spectrum as well. It's good on grasses as well as many broadleaf weeds. Okay, does it last longer than flumioxazin? That is a point of discussion. We've done the research and we've seen that yes, it can last longer, but the difference in longevity is really measured in weeks, not months. Okay, so it's not a huge difference between that and flumioxazin. It's a little weak on pigweeds, particularly the livid amaranth that is becoming much more common in nurseries. If you're starting to get a lot of that, then you may want to rotate back to flumioxazin or even consider the barricade, which is very effective. None of these products are particularly effective on marsh parsley. You see a photo of that in the bottom right-hand corner. Fortunately, the marsh parsley is very slow to develop to maturity, and so you've got plenty of time to get out there and spot treat it with some glyphosate to prevent it from going to seed. And that is one you really want to manage through sanitation and preventing it from going to seed, because very few of our herbicides are particularly effective on it pre-emergence. So where do you get more information about these herbicides? And in fact, any of the herbicides that are registered for use in nurseries is go to my website at NC State University, and under the herbicides tabs, you can see I've circled there are fact sheets, and there are fact sheets for each of these herbicides. Specifically, I'm showing you their SureGuard. It gives you information about what it's used for, the formulations that are available, the recommended rates of application, the weeds controlled, weeds not controlled, and you'll see similar fact sheet for the Marengo and Dazaflam, and they're available for prodiamine and Gallery and all of the other herbicides registered. You will not see fact sheets on these herbicides that we say do not use. Unfortunately, growers have sometimes used these products that contain broad spectrum bare ground industrial type herbicides, and we just don't recommend them. Things that contain imazapyr like Arsenal, Sahara, Habitat, Chopper, Barrier Industrial. We don't recommend Pramitol. Don't use Oust. Don't use a product that is designed for industrial bare ground treatments, or you could end up with crop injury. Here's an example of a product containing Arsenal was applied, product containing imazapyr, excuse me, was applied along this roadway, and you can see here how rain and irrigation wash some material onto the ground cloth. This washed the herbicide into the root zone of a lot of the plants. This is the result. This is an abelia that's severely damaged from root uptake of the herbicide. And here's the damage, stunted growth on a compact holly, and this is root uptake on a Japanese maple from this herbicide. Remember, you know, if you're controlling weeds in gravel, if you're doing large pot and pot operations, you want whatever you're putting on the gravel around these plants to be safe on these plants, right? And here's an example of what I believe to have been damage from an ALS herbicide that was put on the gravel. We never were able to actually diagnose exactly what happened in this site, but the symptoms are all consistent with ALS herbicide injury, specifically something like the Arsenal or Oust or Sahara application. You get the yellowing of the new growth, you get dieback, you get proliferation of the tissues. Many years ago, we might have attributed this to glyphosate, but in the springtime, the plants would grow out of glyphosate injury. You know, applied in the fall, the plants would look very similar to this. So it's very difficult to diagnose the difference between the injury from ALS herbicides and glyphosate after the fact. Also, you've got to be careful about how you use herbicides around your pot and substrate storage areas. Okay, we want to keep these areas weed free because weeds getting into the pots and substrate storage are a problem, but you also don't want to use herbicides like these industrial strength herbicides or root inhibiting herbicides around your pot and substrate storage the best thing to do, of course, is to store pots off of the ground and not on gravel. Okay, so is there, what about the weeds are growing on fence rows and stuff? So for example, large plants like baccharis or coyote bush and dog fennel, you can mow them down before they go to seed, and you can reduce your seed production dramatically. And of course, you can use herbicides, post-emergence herbicides around the fence row, but again, use these herbicides are labeled for use in nurseries, not the industrial type herbicides. So what post-emergence herbicides do we recommend to supplement the weed control of the residual products? Of course, glyphosate. But there are other products, glufosinate, diquat, pelargonic acid. Do not use the auxin herbicides, especially the ester formulations. Now, if you're going to control some woody plants on the perimeter, on the fence row, then a cut stem application with some auxin herbicides such as a triclopyr or a clopyralid is okay, but if you use a cut stem application method, then you're going to dramatically decrease the chances of any spray drift event, and never use the ester formulations. Even the low volatile ester formulations have been shown to volatilize, and your nursery crops are very sensitive to auxin vapor drift injury. So we just say no to the ester formulations, even the low volatile ester formulations. All right, so each of these products has a fit and a purpose, and we all have used glyphosate, but there are concerns about the safety of glyphosate. Whether you agree or disagree with those concerns is actually kind of irrelevant. You may have employees that are concerned, and you may want to look at some alternatives. Another reason why you may want to look at alternatives to glyphosate is we do have glyphosate resistant weeds, and here is a photo of glyphosate resistant horseweed. You can see one plant was dead, the one next to it is starting to regrow. Okay, and that's the kind of symptom you'll see. So if you've been out spraying Roundup and it looks like most of the weeds were dead, but a few of them turned green and started to grow again, those are the resistant ones. Many times those are resistant plants, and you want to control them before they can go to seed and spread the problem, right? Glufosinate is a non-selective post-emergence herbicide. It's sold as Finale, Cheetah Pro. There is a little bit of translocation, but not like with glyphosate. It works fast. It's got no soil residual, no volatility. It controls broadleaf weeds well. It's not quite as good on grasses, but it is gaining uses because it does control many glyphosate-resistant weeds. So it is utilized in the same manner that we currently use glyphosate, right? We have other post-emergence herbicides that are all contact action, like Reward. Now, I'm not going to speak on paraquat because it's a fairly hazardous product to handle, and there are all kinds of new regulations on what you may or may not do with paraquat. So diquat is an alternative to paraquat that is much safer to the user. It's non-selective, post-emergence, contact action, so you want to catch the weeds when they're very young. It has no soil residual, but it can be tank mixed with a residual herbicide such as the SureGuard or the Marengo or Barricade. Okay. Scythe is another contact herbicide that is labeled for use in nurseries, and it is also non-selective. It works very quickly. It's effective on young seedling weeds, but it does have an odor. Okay, and that odor can persist for days. One advantage of the Scythe is it actually is labeled for use in the containers on large pots to control weeds that are getting started in those large pots. Keep it off of the tender green growth of your crop, or you can burn the stems, but it is actually labeled for use in those containers, right? Remember, it's non-selective, so it's not for use over the top of your crop, but just for spot treating in large containers like a big pot and pot type system. Reward may also be used in that situation, but we do not recommend glyphosate or glufosinate in the pots themselves, right? So around the edges of your production beds, it's important to control those weeds to prevent the introduction of weed seeds into your crop. So everything we can do to decrease the seed populations in your crop will make your other weed management programs much more effective and much more efficient. If you want more information about this or other topics related to weed management, nurseries, and landscapes, please visit my website, which you see here. And the easiest way to find this website is just to type into a search engine, Joe Neal, North Carolina State University Weed Control, and my website link will pop up. Thanks for joining us today. I hope this has been useful information.